You're free to text during the documentary though, so there's ways around. I ran across the US-Mexican border in 1981 when I was 7 years old. I did not think at all I was doing anything wrong, that I was committing a crime, or that I was a criminal. I was running for my life.
The United States, a nation of an estimated 325 million people according to the latest U.S. Census, has more immigrants than any other country in the world. According to the Pew Research Center, there are an estimated 45 million immigrants in the U.S. About 11 million of these are undocumented.
I ran across the border for about 12 hours overnight. It was me and the coyote, the guide, the smuggler. My mom and my brother ran 24 hours prior. There were surveillance helicopters with lights about 10 or 20 feet away from us at times. So we had to sit very still until the helicopter passed, and then we would immediately start running again. I was giving it my all at that age. I just thought, if I don't do this, I just pause and die here, wherever that was.
The Pew Research Center has found a decrease in the undocumented population from its peak of 12 million in 2007. The major regions of origin of undocumented immigrants are Mexico and Central America with 71% and Asia with 13%.
So my mother was a teacher in El Salvador in 1981. This was during the Salvadoran Civil War. She was working on equal pay and equal rights for female teachers. The government didn't like that type of work. And so she received death threats at her school. And she was told that if she didn't leave the country, they would kill her and her 2 sons. She wanted to stay in El Salvador. But in fact, teachers were showing up dead all over the place. So she had 2 choices, either stay and risk being killed and her 2 sons being killed, or leave El Salvador and come to the U.S.
Recent arrivals represent a smaller share of all undocumented immigrants, as over 66% have been in the U.S. for more than 10 years. And according to the Migration Policy Institute, over half are at 150% to over 200% above the poverty level.
Often the media uses dehumanizing terms to describe undocumented immigrants. Terms like criminals, rapists, murderers, other terms like invasion and infestation, when in fact, the data shows a completely different story about undocumented immigrants. Let's take crime, for example. A recently published study looked at undocumented immigration and violent crime, and it concluded that there is no correlation or association between undocumented immigrants and violent crime. Another study from the Cato Institute looked at incarceration rates, and they showed that native-born Americans had an over 3-fold higher incarceration rate compared to undocumented immigrants. So you see that the data directly speaks to the misperception in the public about undocumented immigrants and crime. Let's talk about taxes. Data shows that the majority of undocumented immigrants are both employed and file taxes. This goes against the public perception that undocumented immigrants are often not employed and do not file their taxes.
Undocumented immigrants contribute significantly to state and local taxes, collectively paying an estimated $12 billion a year.
Undocumented immigrants are not eligible for social benefits, so they pay into a tax system from which they can never gain social benefits. There's a need for longitudinal data to look at this in the long run, to examine the association between undocumented immigrants' employment and tax filing.
In 1986, as part of the Immigration Reform and Control Act signed by President Reagan, around half of the undocumented immigrants were allowed to apply for a pathway to citizenship.
This administration asked the Congress to pass a comprehensive legislative package, including employer sanctions, other measures to increase enforcement of the immigration laws, and legalization. The Act provides these 3 essential components.
Because we arrived in the United States before 1982, we were blessed and eligible to apply for the 1986 Immigration Reform Act, otherwise known as amnesty. The only one since then. My mom had to show that she was employed. She went through a full background check, so a fully vetted process.
Our objective is only to establish a reasonable, fair, orderly, and secure system of immigration into this country, and not to discriminate in any way against particular nations or people.
We were able to stay here because of that amnesty and really take full advantage of all the opportunities in the U.S., including going through the educational system. Today, I'm a physician, not a criminal or rapist or a murderer. But there's a lot of misinformation being disseminated about undocumented immigrants. The current rhetoric is emotional and based on stereotypes. What I don't see is rhetoric that is data-based. Because there's a need for longitudinal data on undocumented immigrants, we've started this initiative at LifeUndocumented.org. Its remit is to collect undocumented immigrant stories and data and to disseminate these to change and balance out the media rhetoric on undocumented immigrants and to effect better policy making and policy decisions that are based on data and longitudinal data, not on fear and stereotypes. We are looking forward to partnering with others, and we hope that they will join our initiative at LifeUndocumented.org. Together, we can build an immigration process and a pathway to citizenship that is humane, holistic, and globally responsive.
To learn more and get involved, visit lifeundocumented.org.
Okay, so I have two questions. So Marcus, I don't know if you want to do an intro, I can do it, or whatever you prefer. Then I'll go to the two questions after you guys.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick intro. So that's a little glimpse of who we have speaking here today. You've already heard a lot about his story. So we have Dr. Mario Mendoza here speaking about this organization that he founded, Life Undocumented, that's here to talk about, reflect accurately about the undocumented immigrant experience and advocate for policy changes. And Dr. Mario Mendoza is also a clinical anesthesiologist and a director of a pharmaceutical company, and he has had wide-ranging involvement in the medical industry as well as working for the FDA in the past. And I'm just very glad to be welcoming you here today.
So thanks for inviting me, and thank you guys all for coming, and thanks for having me and coming to the talk. So, all right, the two questions. So first one's easy, but it's too easy. So whoever answers that one doesn't get another plate of rice, but whoever answers the second question gets an extra plate of rice, the yellow kind too. Good man, I saw you went after the plantain, so. All right, so this one's kind of easy, I think. So where was the documentary filmed? All right, so no prize for that one. This is too easy. I think there's at least one yellow tab, right? And then this one's a little tougher. No Googling, all right, guys? Let's see. All right, so I'll just let you stare at it for a little bit. So if you can guess, all right, two more questions. Maybe a third. You can guess where that middle part of the logo is from. You get an extra plate of rice. And if you can guess where this comes from, then you get a plate of rice and plantains from his plate. It's really, highly coveted. But no, seriously, so thanks again. You do get an extra plate of rice, by the way, but just think about it. And if it comes to you, just yell it out at some point. So I can tell you the logo is a deconstructed version of something else. It's not exactly like anything. And you might find out on Google if you're cheating already. But
the deconstructed flag?
Really, really deconstructed.
No. Colors somewhat? Okay.
No flag. But I'll give you. Is it a city? You're thinking like a city flag? flag or shape of a city?
No, it's no geographic features of a certain city.
Ah, so I like that thought though. It's a really cool thought. Maybe I'll incorporate New York somehow. No. But keep guessing it if you want. You can even just yell it. So no formality here. So again, so thank you for having me. So a little bit more that you may not see in the documentary. By the way, the documentary is really not comprehensive in terms of my approach to undocumented immigrant advocacy, which is my aim with my last dying breath. Marcus, you don't have to sneak. Don't worry. You're good. You're not. So I quit my job in biotech in July of this year. And really, I started this 3 years ago, but it's been in the back seat ever since in 2016. So somewhere around June, I got this idea, kind of downloaded you guys in about 3 minutes on the flight, actually after a Voto Latino conference, which is a kind of Latino millennial conference. I don't know, it still happens every year. You may have seen the CEO, Maria Teresa Kumar, who's now a CNBC correspondent, but I don't know if she's still the CEO of Voto Latino. So I think that was a little bit of inspiration. It was top of mind, but I even got the ideas for the colors too. So the logo in the middle, by the way, the colors have a lot to do with it. So it's a little bit of a hint. Related to a city, kind of. I don't know. It's still kind of tough, I know. I mean, you got to work for rice. You know how many carbs is in that thing? So, by the way, that guy, that's me. I just eat less cookies now. You know, I'm stricter about my intermittent fasting. But we won't talk about apnea today. We'll get back to this. So my approach is pretty simple. You guys can picture, I'm very visual. I'm a chemistry major. Any chemistry majors here from undergrad? Really? Although, yeah, they're not the majority. So I'm very visual. So think of, anyone been to Vegas? All right, so some. My preference is to win. I'm not a gambling guy, but you've seen dice, right? Or one die. So picture the 5, right? 2, 1, and 2. So that's how I picture this in my mind. So stories to humanizing undocumented immigrants, starting in the U.S. to show that face in terms of the estimated 11 million. It sounds like a number. And then data. There's published data now that I started teaching on, which I already did in a documentary a little bit. But otherwise, real-world data that I'm going to create does not exist now, has not been published, maybe a little bit here and there. I'm talking about a comprehensive data collection, de-identified, nationwide in 10 to 12 cities where 80% of undocumented immigrants are, to speak about them as a group. And I am an advocate, I am not neutral, so I won't hide any of the data, but I know the good that's going to come out of this data based on the published data that does exist now, which is based on the U.S. Census. So it's not real data. So I'm going to call that real-world immigrant data. Okay, it comes from medicine. You guys know real-world data, real-world evidence. So that's, the FDA is looking at that, gives it a little bit more weight, little by little. When you submit a drug application to the FDA, you submit phase 1, 2, 3 data, right? Preclinical supportive data for your drug. Well, there's real-world data that's not based on a randomized clinical trial. And that's the definition. Any study that's not randomized. It's as simple as that. But I'm going to call this really any data that's extracted or gotten directly from the undocumented immigrant. Not unlike, by the way, guys, what the U.S. Census does, or what SAMHSA does every year, Mental Health Services Administration. They interview folks for 45 minutes at a time, one-on-one, and this is how they get this national survey on drug use and health every year. Then they put it together every 2, so they have the 60,000 or so households, representative of 325 million Americans. So I don't have to talk to all estimated 11 million undocumented immigrants to get a good picture of why folks are here. When did they come? How? With whom? And what are their plans here? And my goal in all of this is to advocate for them, to support discussions, and I'll tell you a little bit more in the last slides why it's so important to me besides the obvious. I see an unmet need here. I feel that the humanizing aspect of this is very important, but a discussion only goes so far if you can't reference numbers. And so at that point, someone would have to call me a liar that I didn't speak to undocumented. And it's like I do every day in Jackson Heights, like where I get my tacos. I'm kidding. So again, stories and data to inform and affect the media discussion. You know how one-sided that is right now, and uninformed and untrue and to inform and affect immigration policy that's humane and actually based on data. Because I know this data will advocate for humane immigration policy. I know the good that immigrants do in this society, and why am I starting there? What value immigrants add? Because that's where we are as a society in the United States, and quite frankly, globally. So someone just reached out to me yesterday from the UK, and her husband is Lebanese undocumented, and they're going through that process in the UK. So I want to start here and then extrapolate my model globally. So right now I'm just in N01, so it's just me. So that in effect is my goal. I quit my job to do this full time, although I do have to feed myself, so I'm doing a little bit of consulting on the side slowly, because I do have to pay rent. And I owe school loans. Anyone owe school loans? It's just me? Or a few folks. It's okay, you're shy about it. I owe like a big house. All right, so these are the things I think in my background that are important to the ongoing conversation. Oh, I love the back screen. I just realized I don't have to keep looking back here. I can just look back there. So, what's in the discussion now are children in detention, right? And I'll go into that in the last slides. I'll show you some numbers related to that. People being held because of the remain in Mexico or migrant protection protocols, officially, MPP. Okay? And then there's a zero tolerance policy that was enacted in May of 2008 and finished in June of 2018, sorry for both. So just three or so months where that policy was in place. Can you guys guess how many children were separated in about 2 or 3 months at the border? May to July 2018, zero tolerance. So about 3,100 and change plus another 1,200 unaccounted for, guys. 3,100 actual lives ranging from months old, right, to 4 to 8 years old. And I'll show you those numbers a bit more. Of which about 135 as of November have crossed alone at that age. I crossed at 7 years old. I still remember the helicopter lights, hiding in bushes. My quads hurt, I remember my legs hurting. I was supposed to be driven across. I have a really great loving mom who's now back in El Salvador. And she paid for me to be driven across, but I in fact was not. So, but I'm so glad I was not, because then I wouldn't be up here today. Okay, so I'm very grateful for that. So going back to I think the points that I bring, the '86 Amnesty Act. Do you guys know there's been another Amnesty Act in the history of the United States? Can anyone think of another? You can just yell it out if you'd like. Exactly. So I was afraid of that when I started looking into this. There's no other Amnesty Act ever since 1790 in the history of the United States. There's one pro-migration act that during the very early start of the Industrial Revolution, like late 1800s, it's really early 1900s, they wanted folks to come over from the EU. So there was that kind of come one, come all, as long as you're from Europe. But there were 2 to 3 Chinese specific exclusion acts after that. And then the only other way that you could get on a pathway to citizenship is if you served in the armed forces and you can request your immediate family. And that was under attack recently, right? If you have a baby ex-US, they're not automatically a citizen. But otherwise, the only Amnesty Act ever, which wasn't supposed to be, this '86 IRCA, or Immigration Reform Control Act, under Reagan, was supposed to punish businesses for hiring undocumented immigrants and to control the border. But no one has called me to ask me how I'm doing, what I've been doing, or with whom. So there's no follow-up in any of this. So you guys are first and second year med students? Mainly second? Mainly first, okay. So in medicine, and I see Dr. Tapia in the back, I don't know if you've ever heard Dr. Tapia say something akin to, if you're gonna order an EKG for chest pain, and you're not gonna follow up on it, first, do you wanna follow up on it? Do you wanna order that? If you get a false positive, right? Or what's the word I'm looking for? An artifact, like you do in an MRI, you could, but same thing with an EKG, then you have to follow up on that. And maybe it's GERD, so do you wanna do that? So this '86 IRCA, there's no follow-up. So why even do it if you're never going to look into its effects? Well, that's really because it was never meant to be an amnesty act. So, By the way, I'm not advocating for not getting an EKG for medical legal purposes. I won't go into that discussion. So I'm not advocating for that. Just do whatever Dr. Tapia says. Let's say when you're around. So in terms of going back to detention, trauma sources, pre-migration, the reasons folks are fleeing their home country. Remember, this is not just Latin Americans we're talking about, right? At least 13% from Asia and Southeast Asia. So let's not forget that. I run into these folks all the time, believe it or not, in NYC driving Ubers. So, and Bangladeshi gentleman that ran across the border in the 80s, and he's still in limbo. He has not gotten residency, he just has this permanent visa status. It's really not a humane kind thing to do. So pre-migration, reasons for leaving. For us, they threatened my mom because she was a teacher and she's working on teachers' rights, believe it or not. Otherwise known as the TIAA-CREF, a teachers union. So they told her, you're a communist, we're gonna kill you, the Salvadoran government, if you don't leave in a month. And she's a really strong person, so she said, actually, no. But then teachers are showing up all over the country then. So my family said, you guys have to get out of here. And specifically, it threatened her and her two boys, my brother and I. Was 15 at the time, and I was 7, my mom was 38. And we came to New York, so I grew up in the Bronx because she had teacher friends that lived there. But that's the reason that we fled, not before we applied for political asylum. That was denied. So we did apply for political asylum. I think this is a very important point. We didn't want to come here. I grew up with no family here, and it's not something we wanted. My mom left her career, and she cleaned houses here for 25 years. She's a teacher in El Salvador. So I give really all thanks to God and Mom for directing and guiding my brother, because even though I grew up with very little, I had everything I needed, which is Mom's guidance. She still probably inappropriately, positively reinforces me every day. Like I send her a picture, she's like, you look so cute. She probably shouldn't do too much of that. She's created a monster. So, and the last thing I'll say on that slide, I think another point of discussion that I bring to this is I'm in the process, I've told Dr. Tapia, of applying for a Texas medical license so I can go treat undocumented immigrants at the border. One is called La Frontera Shelter, which was started by a University of Illinois classmate of mine, and the other is Annunciation Clinic, also in Texas. I also like to partner with asylum legal firms and help out on a voluntary basis. So this is all voluntary. As you can imagine, I'm going to skip some of these numbers. We already went through them, but they're important things. This is just, I want to give you this visual. This is not to go through it. I just like the visual. So you see right at the top, 1790. Okay, it's real first kind of immigration-related act. You see a long list of mainly exclusion acts, the one act for Europe that was pro-migration that I mentioned, and then that 86 IRCA. So since the Mazzoli Act, 1.8 million undocumented immigrants at the time, of 4 million applied. It was a fully vetted process, background search, and all that. You had to be employed, you had to be paying taxes. Does anyone know undocumented immigrants pay taxes? You want to say?
Just a big pay tax, that's it.
Yeah, or how you're able to pay taxes.
Oh, I'm not sure.
So you can get,
You can talk about
oh yeah, you can say it,
you talk about individual tax number and are able to submit taxes like any other person.
that's right. And so it's just a temporary tax ID number. And on the form, it actually says that, social ID number or TIN, so tax ID. So I just kind of wanted to give you that visual. We'll skip this. This is stuff that I've been up to, I can come back to. And I can tell you how I've been vetting this. I want to get to this. And then I'll tell you my approach, right, of stories, very important, and data. That's never been done before that I know of. There's nothing in the literature that I know of. So I'm in touch with George Washington at the School of Public Health to co-publish with them. Of course, all de-identified, but I really want to start using this data and push it out into the media as best as I can. That's part of my effort, as well as these stories, right? So you can put data in a face, and I feel like that will be a stronger argument. I don't think I'm the solution to undocumented immigration. It's been part of the approach of many folks doing a ton of stuff, and I'll tell you how you guys can get involved even locally at the end, okay? But let's go through some of these really important numbers. you guys have class at 12, right? So maybe like 5:2, I should stop. Oh, sorry, at 1. My bad. So this is a new number. The last number that I saw right at the top, and I'm sorry there's so much red, but as I was highlighting this, I thought, oh, this one's important. Oh, this one too. Oh, this one too. And I just kept highlighting because it's all heartbreaking stuff. So remember, like the opioid abuse epidemic, these are actual lives, okay? The opioid abuse epidemic takes, you're gonna read something like 95 lives a day, but that's based on fentanyl and heroin. Illicit fentanyl, like CHF and trans or cis fentanyl, it's not very responsive to Narcan. Okay, so you have to give a whole bunch of doses. Usually you give 0.4 to 0.8 milligrams, 2 doses in ED. You have to give 2 to 4 to 8 milligrams. Something's wrong because it's a competitive antagonist, binds the opioid receptors much higher rate than the opioid or mu opioid agonists with like morphine or heroin or fentanyl. But anyway, akin to the opioid abuse epidemic and those overdose deaths of 95 a day, of which about half are from prescription opioids, those are lives, guys. Those are actual lives, just like these. So it was over 5,500 a couple of weeks ago. This number I just saw this week, over 10,000, very specific. This is not estimated. This is counted by Human Health Services and the Department of Homeland Security. I think somehow maybe worked with them, I'm not sure. But you see over 100 centers. I'm sorry, I forgot to look how many centers there are nationwide and how many in Pennsylvania. I know Berg Center is here, right? And there's ongoing activity to try and shut it down. And in 14 states. Really no exaggeration, so I just talked to someone, my favorite chicken soup place in Long Island City in Queens, and I talked to a Peruvian immigrant. Her husband was in this hielera. Does anyone know what that word means? Not Dr. Tapia, no fair.
Cooler. Cooler?
Yes, exactly, so cooler. So a freezer. So her husband got, you guys know what a bed sore is? You see that in ICU if you haven't already. So he got a bed sore, basically, from being on the cold, hard ground for so long. Okay? Her husband. So this stuff is true, what's being published. The no hugging policy is not on here, where siblings are not allowed to hug for obvious reasons. Hugging is a natural state within a family, a natural state of being for most folks. And so it's a way to dehumanize people and children. There's no tracking system in any of this. So at least, this many have been just, I guess, lost. You can imagine that. That zero tolerance policy was ended in June by the administration's hand. Have you guys noticed in my documentary and in person, I don't say the T word. I can't say that word, I'm sorry. And I barely say the White House, I say administration. And I usually don't use the word president. But I just can't say that name. So I don't refer to it in my documentary. I want my nonprofit to be a source of positivity and inspiration, not criticism, anger, and negativity. Since when does anger dissolve more anger? If you haven't rotated through the ER, you'll find that out very soon when someone comes in at 3 in the morning and they're on some kind of substance. And when I did trauma in Miami, we would get called all sorts of things. I can't tell you the stories because there's a lot of expletives in it. But we always had a good time because we knew people were, high or drunk, and they called us all sorts of stuff. And the way we fought back is by telling them we're going to take very good care of you, sir, as they're spitting on us. So, but a lot of patients were good. I don't need to put it that way. So it's probably a little bit higher than this because there's no tracking system, so we don't know. Kind of like there's no data on undocumented immigrants, so we don't know. It's an estimated 11 million. 60,000 migrants on the Mexico side in Matamoros, which is a part of the state Tamaulipas. Okay? It's kind of a hot spot for the drug cartel. No exaggeration. I'm gonna head down there with one of the docs from La Frontera in February, and we want to start doing a survey on those folks on that side of the border. Because have you heard why they're there, who they are? Have you heard anything about them? No, right? I mean, you know that they're there. Go ahead.
I know that they're now requiring migrants to apply for asylum in a third country, in another country, before applying in the U.S. And they're also capping how many people can apply each day at the border.
So like, meaning like the Northern Triangle, or maybe other countries I don't know about. Guatemala,
Yeah.
Honduras, where they're being sent back, right guys? So someone being sent back to El Salvador. By the way, recently, so I met with Pew Research Center, which I skipped. His latest data, really nice guy, Director of Migration Policy, Mark Lopez, shows that 47% of the migrants coming through are from Honduras, by far. Okay, so El Salvador is about 8%. My mom lives in El Salvador. Being sent back to El Salvador for safety is comical, to say the least. I mean, she just moved because next door, a gang member came by, this is no exaggeration, and they shot my stepdad's nephew in the head because they were looking for this teenager to join the gang. So my stepdad's nephew stepped in, and he took a shot to the head, he died. That was across the wall from where my mother was, so I texted my brother immediately and said, can we get mom out of there right now, please? She did, and she took a few months, but she moved to a condo that's under machine gun guard, like this, as soon as you walk in. So I'm not looking forward to going to El Salvador in December, but I love mom, so anyway. It's source of stress for me. So anyway, of the 60,000, about a quarter are children. At least 3,000 are under 5 years old, and at least 400 infants in dirty water, exposed to the elements, respiratory infection, right? There's a girl that drowned in the Rio Grande already. And as I mentioned before about that we know of, this many children have gone alone across the border. I can't imagine that. I went with a coyote. I can't imagine going alone or how they did that. And these are two stories from the media that age and that recent, November 2019. This is based on the American Pediatric, I think it's the American Pediatric Association or Academy, I'm so sorry, or American Academy of Pediatrics. So, you know, kind of makes medical common sense, right? Acute, what's called toxic stress, like a detention center, increases the risk of things like this, cardiovascular disease, of course, PTSD, diabetes though, things like borderline personality disorder. So I've been speaking to that recently. So if you saw my documentary, you saw it now. I don't know if you saw my talk in DC. So I've been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And if you Google it, they describe us like monsters. I try not to read about myself as much as possible. I don't have the psychotic symptoms, thank God, so I can function. But I am up here, and I am very functional, and I'm not perfect. So I started advocating for that as well, because I did go to therapy for it. And then the last thing, right, the administration may be forced to provide mental health services. Imagine, you spilled the milk, we're gonna force you to maybe clean it up. So I can't imagine that, you know, I didn't go through a detention center, and obviously you have to have a genetics for borderline personality disorder. By the way, not a lot of advocacy there, I'm not surprised. You guys probably maybe heard of the guy from SNL that has that diagnosis because he's dating Ariana Grande, or was. So that's the only person I know that came out and spoke to it. I can tell you it's not fun. I manage it every 5 minutes, every 30 seconds. It's just you guys can't tell. But on the inside, I'll tell you a little bit about it. The core is this, because I can go on and on, but I won't. There's very effective therapy. I do want to say that. It's over 96% effective, so it's really great. But what it feels like when you have BPD, at its core, is physiologic, and that's this. When I'm in an argument or I'm at Target and the line is too long or the train is late, what my body starts to do without my permission is it says, a lion is coming to eat you right now. So my heart rate goes up, my blood pressure goes up, and my executive center, you guys have done neuro? So my executive center is gone. It's flooded with stress, and there are times I can pick that up in my body and I take a breath and I calm down. There's times it overwhelms me. So I think I'm a really good advocate actually, because I'm not 100% well, which is great because I can let people know, look, this is a hard beast to deal with, and these kids are gonna have some sort of something. There is no doubt, right, that they'll already have this. There's no doubt. Cold floors, lights 24 hours a day. These are torture techniques that are known. They're being used at the detention center. So in about a week or so, I'll be in San Diego with Doctors for Camp Closure. And that's right at the top. And that was started by 3 docs. I spoke in DC for their first event. We're all gonna head down to a San Diego area detention center with free flu vaccines in our hands we already did by letter of CBP to let us in to provide flu vaccinations. So then we're just gonna occupy the area for a few days if they don't let us. Don't necessarily text that last part that I said. That's between us, right? But I'm gonna head down there or head over there on Sunday. I feel like the ongoing cruelty. I'm not the type of guy to sit in a protest. That's not my style. But the ongoing cruelty, and I know this is a harsh word to hear, but it's the truth. The passive genocide that's being allowed to happen at these detention centers, I have to step up my action. Not allowing free flu vaccines to come in is passive genocide. So how you guys can get involved, so nationally, through my Facebook alone, not that you should follow me on social media, I should. I can connect you with these guys. Let me go really quickly. Doctors for Camp Closure, you don't have to be a doc. Just to kind of stay involved in what's happening, because they're getting a lot of traction. Go to their public page and join if you guys would like, as med students, you're more than welcome to. They're going to be involved in mainly letter writing to policymakers, direct action kind of things. Team Brownsville is on the border. The other side of that is Matamoros, where the 60,000 migrants or so are. They head across the bridge every day to feed folks. So I met them in Houston a few months ago. You're very familiar with this, right? And so the clinic that's here, where you can get involved as well. Minority Foundation, that's mainly legal services, stuff that I'm listing so you guys at least hear the name. Global Response Management is also, they're on the Mexico side, but providing necessary things like tents, shelter, food, things like that. Miles for Migrants, donated miles, so once folks are here, then they can travel. Project Lifeline is a friend of mine that started this. It's legal services focused on detention and getting folks out of detention, right? We know that how many days of detention cause trauma for a child? Does anyone know? So 1 day. There should be 0 days of detention for children. It's actually based on the United Nations protocol that the United States is violating. There is no day that is good for children and their mental health that is good in detention. So right in Philly, besides Puentes, of course, there's La Puerta Abierta, mental health. And believe it or not, CapsForKids.org has a whole list of ways that you guys can get involved as really budding physicians, right, that you are, healthcare providers. If you go to PICC, Pennsylvania Immigration and Citizenship Coalition, I haven't looked at all of them, but I do know that their remit is pro-immigrant. Not all migration or immigrant coalitions on the web are pro-immigrant. There are more some on the right that are absolutely not. So I did click on a few of these to get an idea of PICC, and they are pro-immigrant. I didn't see, for some reason, Catholic Charities for any folks that are religious or swayed that way, and then Lutheran Immigration Services as well is pretty active. But this is just, in PICC, just under Philadelphia, in ways that you can get involved. There's Western PA, Eastern PA, it's about 60 members actually that are a part of PICC. So if you want to get involved, that's a really great way of doing it. Definitely join Doctors for Camp Closure, not because I want more followers for them, it's just I know how active they are, me being with them. You guys can at least keep abreast of what's happening in the immigration space that way. That's one way of doing it. That. And then of course with me, I'm at LifeUndocumented. The reason I'm pitching that is because I do need followers. I can't do this by myself. And so I need the stories, right? I started collecting them already, and I need people to support my drive. Quite frankly, I'm in touch with Telemundo, Univision. They haven't done my story yet because I think they like to get to a certain number. You know, right now I have like 3 followers. I'm exaggerating. So they like to see, I think, certain traction, which makes sense. But so I'm going to throw that out there. I'll leave that up to you guys. But there are a few ways to get involved and work with me if you'd like. It's just me for now as a nonprofit. I'm currently registering as a 501c4. Does anyone know the difference between a 501c3 and a C4? I didn't either, so no worries. Most nonprofits are C3s. A C4 donation is not tax exempt, so it's not a benefit that way. But I can walk into a congressperson's office and a C3 can't. And that's why I did that on purpose, even though my funding chances are much lower. So that's part of why I want to do consulting on the side. I want to feed my nonprofit nonprofit directly until I get angel investors involved. And so the universe or God or whatever you may or may not believe in, it's already taking care of that. So I have full faith. So I've vetted my approach, by the way, through all these folks here, including NYC Mayor's Office, and then really one of the most well-known research output centers like Pew, Cato, Migration Policy Institute, and they all think it's a good idea. They think it hasn't really been done and it's of use. Again, it's not just the data, it's the story dissemination that I want to speak to, and then as well as health data in the future. Once I volunteer at clinics, I can speak to what I'm seeing in those clinics. I already know from my friends that are doing that now down at La Frontera. So I'm going to stop there. Sorry, I always go way over. So I'll stop there, and questions or comments, anything top of mind, anything you'd want to know, I'd be happy to answer or discuss further. Don't be shy.
I'm just curious if there's any plan for, like, while you're collecting this data and these narratives, if there's a plan to, if, like, when you're collecting a narrative, you identify someone who's in need of services, of connecting them with those services while collecting the stories.
It's a very, very astute point. So that's in a lot of fields, right? When you're collecting data, if you get a safety concern, which is what that is, you have to act on it. You can't just, kind of akin when you're in an ER, someone comes in for toe pain and they tell you that they want to cut themselves. You can't ignore that. So yeah, so that's how I would feel about it. It's like that scenario. And because I'm a part of this D4CC network, I would put them in touch, right in New York actually, with Asylum, ASAP, Asylum, Legal Services Advocacy Project, ASAP. They do asylum cases, and it's a bunch of attorneys. It's a law firm, essentially. Not unlike Physicians for Human Rights, or PHR, and some of the work that they do, with CARE in DC. And I apologize for Philly, there's a few, there's a lot, not just a few, legal services. One of them may even have, there we go, at least, but a lot of these actually, some of the alliances with PIC have legal services where you could triage people. And then Project Lifeline, part of what they want to do is triage folks. So what if it's not a legal need? If it's, what if someone has bipolar and then they went through a detention center, so now they have acute on chronic. And so they may need help. Or recently I saw that 2 kids on Long Island, it's really inhumane, guys. Their inhalers were taken away. So one of those kids had to go to the ICU because his beta inhaler was taken away. I mean, that's, unnecessary roughness, right? There's no reason for that. Sorry, I have football on my mind. I don't know if anyone wants to watch this. So I know this is a heavy topic, so I'll there's no questions. I'll do a quick story here. It's meant to make you laugh, but it's true, okay? I think it's hilarious. So I just saw my brother, he's at St. Joe's. Oh, no.
Sorry, could you go back to the Philly-specific services real quick? Thank you.
Sure. Maybe I'll leave it up, actually. And this is just Philly. It's 60 members under PICC, so really it's this one that you need to remember. I can also send this out as a PDF, Marcus, and you can share. So no worries. So my brother, when he was 15, before there was martial law in El Salvador, 6 p.m., you were found on the street, you were shot, no questions asked, by the government, presumed a guerrilla, part of the resistance, okay? So he was stopped before martial law because some kid came by with a bomb in our neighborhood and then ran. They found my brother and his friend. This isn't the funny part yet. So my brother had a machine gun to his head, and he thought, I'm gonna end up in a ditch, because that's what would actually happen. They were just shot, thrown in a ditch, no questions. But thank God that day, the colonel went around the neighborhood, extracted all the kids, questioned them, all the moms followed, including my mom, and she got in between that machine gun and my brother, and then they told me he's a good, son, he's not involved in any of this stuff, and so please let him go, and they did. But after this, can you believe this? 2 more times at 5:55, I'm not kidding. He would come around his bicycle at 5:55 going home, and there were tanks like you could see on the other street, and he's on his bicycle coming home at 5:55. Martial law was in effect at 6. You guys know what he was doing, where he was coming from? And my poor mom, can you imagine her waiting for this kid? He's visiting his girlfriends. His girlfriends. That's what this kid was doing while there were tanks on the street.
Priorities. It's all about priorities.
Unbelievable. So I just asked him this 2 weeks ago to get this detail right, and he was busting out laughing. He said, "You should tell him why I did it." Visiting girlfriends. Oh my God. One of the times he was actually too late. I think it was 6:15, so he just stayed over his girlfriend's house. So that was kind of awkward. Yeah, that was weird. Honestly, I don't know if I have more of the Philly stuff. Yeah, not on here. But yeah, I think PIC is a really, and catforkids.org, actually. That's where I found La Puerta Abierta. So that's ways that you guys can get involved besides Puentes de Salud, of course. So I just spoke with them a couple of days ago. You want to chat, doing great work. I don't know, any comments, questions? Like, we're right at almost 1, so I don't want to hold you guys up. I'm really verbose. I did so much better this time. Imagine. Pretty bad.
Thank you so much. So we are recording it, so we can like send out an email with the recording.
Oh, thanks.
Also,